Okay. I need to remember my Uncle Gene Stillwell. He's had some tests done. They seem to think that he may be suffering from prostate cancer. We'll find something out and we'll let everybody know. But please keep him in your prayers, and that whole family in your prayers. They have a lot of health issues going on with them, so keep him. Yes, ma'am. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. She's just it's a mess. There's not much, and there's nothing that can be done about it. So. Millie, she's just she doesn't want to be there, and when you go, yeah, she doesn't know what's going on. Why can't I leave? And she knows that it's just yeah. Yeah. Well, we had asked something about going and picking her up, but they said the problem is that when you pick her, if you brought her, she would enjoy it, but then when you drop her off back off there, it would be like you're dropping her off all over again, and she wouldn't understand why she's there, and then she gets very upset. Why can't I go with you? Why do I have to come back here? So there's nothing that can be done. I mean, there's really nothing that can be done. And it's actually better for her mentally to stay there rather than to even leave and come to church. And it bothers her, but it hurts her conscience, even though it shouldn't. It hurts her conscience. So there's not, like I said, it's a tough situation, and it's not going to get any better. This is just the way it is. Yeah. Yeah. So keep that family in your prayers, please do. And she does appreciate cards and visits. So I mean, it's if you can send her cards, and if you can go and see her, please do. She does appreciate it, and after a little bit of time, she most of the time will remember. If you engage her in conversation, she'll remember certain things. So she does enjoy them, as she does enjoy cards. So please send those as you will. Anybody else? Anything else? Okay. Good to see Brother Larry back. Done with travel for a little bit, huh? Yeah. Yeah, if they won't come to you, you got to go to them, right? Okay. Oh, okay. All right, so y'all are heading out. All right, heading out for Texas. Absolutely. Yeah. Mackenzie's leaving today to go to Freed Hardeman for a week for camp, so please remember her in your prayers as well. My daughter's going to Freed Hardeman for camp for a week.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Anybody? Yeah. Yeah. Hmm? No. No, she'll be fine. I'll see her on Friday. Not worried about it. We will see her later. Yeah. Yeah. Anyway. All right. Anybody else? All right. Let's go ahead and start us off with a prayer. Our Father in heaven, we're thankful for the day, and we're grateful, Lord, for your watch care over us. And we pray, Lord, your blessings on our assembly here. And we pray, Lord, your blessings on those who are on their way here for worship. We ask, Lord, that you bless those that we've mentioned this morning, those who are sick, those who are shut in, those who are under doctor's care, and all the people that are awaiting test results, and all of the things that are going on with physical health. And we pray, Lord, your blessings on them. We ask, Lord, that you give them back their health if it be your will. We ask, Lord, that you help us to minister to them, to encourage them, to strengthen them, to lift them up with prayers and cards and visits and all of the things that we could do to make them feel better about the situation that they find themselves in. We're thankful for the opportunities that you place in front of us every day. We ask, Lord, that you bless those who are traveling, those who are going to be going away from us. We ask, Lord, that you bless them in their travels, help them to have a good travel, a good visit wherever they're going to be, and then bring them back to us again safely, Lord. We're thankful, Lord, for the answered prayers for so many that are better after being sick. We ask, Lord, that you continue to be with Brother Jerry as he continues to recuperate. We're thankful for the progress that he's made, and we pray, Lord, that he's able to go into rehab and then come back home again soon. Thank you, Lord, for all that you do for us. And we're especially thankful for your Son. It's in his name we pray. Amen. All right. We're in Exodus, right? We've gotten as far as the last part of Exodus chapter 20, and we're going to start at the finish up chapter 20, and then going to get into chapter 21. In chapter 20, of course, we read this is the Decalogue, right? This is the Ten Commandments, the underpinnings for all of the law. Everything that we read about in Leviticus comes from these 10. They're all offshoots of these 10. Even as far as the Sabbath day and all of those things, what is allowed to be made by hands, the idea of graven images and all of those things. And here, God is speaking to the people directly, and they're scared. The people are scared because they've seen the power of God, and it's interesting that in spite of seeing the power of God, in spite of being scared to come close to the mountain, when He's no longer directly in front of them in that idea of the dark clouds and all of the thunder, they have no problem breaking His laws. It's interesting. It kind of goes to show, right? When mom and dad aren't around, what do young kids want to do? They want to play. They want to do things that are inappropriate. They're wrong, so to speak. So it just goes to show that the people haven't changed much in 4, 5, 6,000 years, right? They were probably kind of the same thing. We do the same thing over and over and over again. But anyway, we finished up in verse 21. It says, the people stood far off while Moses drew near to the thick darkness where God was. And then he goes, it's kind of a direct cut here, but he goes right into the idea of laws. And Lord said to Moses in verse 21, thus you shall say to the people of Israel, you have seen for yourselves that I have talked with you from heaven. All right. And he goes right into that by saying, you shall not make gods of silver to be with me, nor shall you make for yourselves gods of gold. An altar of earth you shall make for me, and sacrifice on it your burnt offerings and your peace offerings and your sheep and your oxen. In every place where I cause my name to be remembered, I will come to you and I will bless you. If you make me an altar of stone, you shall not build it of hewn stones, for if you wield your tool upon it, you profane it. And you shall not go up by steps to my altar, that your nakedness not be exposed upon it. And it stops right there, and this goes in the idea of proper worship. All of these things that we're going to look at all deal with how God He wants His people to behave. It's behavioral type things. He's directing them in their paths. When we read when we read in the Bible all of these things that God says, when He says direct, I will direct your steps, and when the people who are writing say, Lord, direct my path, illuminate my path, He illuminated it by the law. That's how He did it. There was nothing extraneous. Everything that they needed to know in order to be pleasing was found in the law. He says, this is what I want you to do. I'm going to give you step-by-step instructions on how you will be holy to me, how I will make you my people. It's in obedience to the law. And there's no change today, right? The law has just changed. We're no longer under the law of Moses. We're under the law of Christ. But still, obedience to the law is what makes us separate and apart, right? I mean, that's it. It's not simply enough to become a New Testament Christian. We must continue to walk in the law of Christ. The good thing is that the law of Christ is so much better than the law of Moses. Law of Christ is his yoke is easy, his burden is light. Why? Because it's not the law of Moses, and that Christ wanted to make that very clear. Man, don't go. When the author of Hebrew writes, and again, I strongly encourage everyone to read the book of Hebrews, because it really brings into focus how much better the law of Christ is over the law of Moses. I mean, it's immeasurably better. It's so much better, because under the law of Moses, look at some of the things that they talk about. I mean, there's so much stuff to remember and keep, and all of these things. And under the law of Christ, now it makes it's so much easier. So let's look at some of these. A lot of these are in dealings with how the Hebrews were to deal with one another. Okay, the first one of these in chapter 21. Now these are the rules that you shall set before them when you buy a Hebrew slave. Now the idea here is we've got to remember there's differentiation. There were slaves who were slaves by choice, and yes, they were slaves by choice. Then there were those who were slaves not by choice. The idea of a slave that was not by choice was when they would subdue an enemy, and they would take for them captives, and they would bring them to their home, and they would be servants to them. And then there were cases in which there was volunteer slavery, and that word slavery there is probably not it's defined correctly, but it's not translated correctly. The idea here is more the indentured servitude that we might have read about early in this nation's history, where people would come, they would be indentured servants to people to pay for their passage, so to speak. In the days of the Hebrews, almost like every other time in history, there were people who would get into financial difficulties and they would run up debt and they could not pay their debt. So in order to satisfy their debt, they would go into indentured servitude, and they would serve for a period of time in order to pay off this debt. This is not to be confused with, say, people who were taken captive and then were forced into servitude. Okay, it's two different things. But so here he makes a differentiation, right? He says, when you buy a Hebrew slave, so in other words, when you buy someone who has gone into servitude in order to pay their debt, and this is what they're talking about, this is a kinsman. This is one who is part of your part of the 12 tribes. These are people who are part of the family, the children of God. When you buy a Hebrew slave, he shall serve 6 years, and in the 7th he shall go out free for nothing. So this is the idea of the Jubilee, right? Every 7th year. 7 is a kind of an important number in the Hebrew lifestyle, right? 7. So the idea that the land has 7 years, right? And the 7th year, it's going to be a Sabbath for the land. You don't till the soil, right? So here we go. He's going to serve you for 6 years. You keep track of those 6 years. In the 7th year, he's free. He doesn't owe you anything anymore. That's it. No matter what his debt was, no matter how immeasurable his debt was, after 6 years, he's done. All right? So if he comes in single, he shall go out single. If he comes in married, then his wife shall go out with him. If his master, now here's a differentiation. If his master gives him a wife, in other words, while he's in his household, and his master goes and finds him a wife and brings a wife to him, if his master gives him a wife and she bears him sons or daughters, then the wife and her children shall be her master's, and he shall go out alone. But if the slave plainly says, I love my master, I love my wife, and I love my children, I will not go out free. In other words, he's made a home for himself. This is now his household, so to speak. It says, his master shall bring him to God, and he shall bring him to the door of the doorpost. His master shall bore his ear through with an awl, and he shall be his slave forever. The idea of marking, he marked himself as part of that household. And the young people sing a song, you'll pierce my ear, and that's that concept. I've decided that I'm not going to go out anymore. And that kind of rings true today. When we decide that we're not leaving Christ. We're going to be with Christ forevermore. I love my master. I love my family. I love my place here. I will not go out. And the idea of pierce my ear, and that's where we get this from. Let's see. I don't want to go through every single one of these specifically, but there's very specific ideas here in regards to how these men and women were to treat one another. When a man sells his daughter as a slave, now we have to remember this. Okay, this was not a sexual slave. This is not a prostitution type of deal. This is the idea of a man is trying to settle accounts. Sometimes he would have to sell his children in order to satisfy a debt that he owed. This was not simply a concept of, hey, I'm going to make money for myself. This was the idea of, I owe so much money, I cannot pay, and he would sell his children into servitude. And that daughter would go into another man's house as a servant of the household only. A man could not sell his daughter as a wife. That God would have found that reprehensible. That was not the way you did things. Okay? She shall not go out as the male slaves do. If she does not please her master, who has designated her for himself, then he shall let her be redeemed. He shall have no right to sell her to a foreign people, since he has broken faith with her. So, in other words, we're keeping this in the family. I can't sell a Hebrew slave to anyone else, to the nations outside. If he takes another wife to himself, he shall not diminish her food, her clothing, or her marital rights. And if he does not do these 3 things for her, she shall go out for nothing without payment of money. Who's taking care of people, right? and these are written into law. They had no right to supersede these laws by making laws for themselves. He says, whoever strikes a man that he dies shall be put to death. We're going to see this here in verse 23. But if he did not lie in wait for him, then God let him fall into his hand, then I will appoint for you a place to which he must flee. Okay? The idea of the cities of a refuge. But if a man willfully attacks another to kill him by cunning, you shall take him from my altar that he may die. So murder is repaid by capital punishment. Whoever strikes his father or mother shall be put to death. Boy, he took it very seriously, didn't he? The family unit was of utmost importance to God. He took the family unit very seriously. And the idea that a father and mother had a place in the family that was to be held in a very serious state of honor was not to be overlooked. A father and mother were the most important people in the household. A child, while loved by mom and dad, still had a subordinate role to mom and dad. All right, they were to be treated with honor. Now, does that mean that a father and mother could run roughshod over the family? No, we find that a little bit further on in the rules that God states. That father and mother were to keep faith with the children. But he says that if you strike your father and mother, you shall be put to death. He took that concept very seriously. And that goes into the idea about the relationship that we have with our Father, isn't it? It's to mirror that. The idea of the marriage relationship mirrors the relationship that we have with Christ. All these things, they're earthly things, but he's trying to teach us a spiritual lesson with them. All right? Whoever curses his father and mother shall be put to death. Kind of serious business. But if you look at verse 23, there's an underlying concept behind it all. But if there is harm, then you shall pay life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, stripe for stripe. Now, why do you think that it is that God instated this concept of the eye for an eye and a tooth for tooth? What was the underlying reason behind that very clear delineation, that very serious idea of tit for tat? Okay? Everybody agree with that? Okay, teach respect. Maybe curtail some of the foolishness, right? Anything else? What's that? Okay, it shows that one person is not more important than another. All three of these are good, right? Anything else that you can think of? Did God take punishment seriously? Did he take harm against his people seriously? You know, this doesn't diminish, all right? The punishment should fit the crime. It doesn't diminish the crime. You know, we hear people say all the time, well, that's a very harsh punishment for the crime committed. I dare say, compared to what we find in what God's idea about punishment, we're actually very lenient many times in how we punish. We're very careful. You know, we don't want to go overboard, so to speak. Sometimes we do. Hey, listen, that happens. Sometimes we do go overboard in punishment. Oftentimes, though, I think that we find that the punishment is far more lenient, of course, certainly than we find in the Old Testament. God was very serious. He took crimes against his people by their kinsmen, especially, very seriously. You know, if you kill someone, if you lie in wait for a man and you kill him and you take his life, then your life is to be taken. And there was to be, you know, there wasn't to be changed at all. It wasn't to be lessened by any means. And then, in spite of all of that, or because of all that, he's very specific in the way that it's to be done. It wasn't to be mob justice, was it? When the man's family went after this killer, he could go and he could flee, and then he would be brought to trial. It wasn't for somebody to just say, well, he killed somebody, let's round up the posse and go after him and string him up from the nearest tree. No, he's to be tried. He's to go on trial, and he's to have a sentence pronounced, not simply mob justice. So he took that very seriously. But I think all of these reasons are good. He wants us to understand that he takes it very seriously. There's not to be any differentiation. This person is not to receive a different punishment from this person. Yes, absolutely. It probably curtailed a great deal of it. You might think twice if you realize that if I put out someone's eye, I'm going to have my eye put out. If I steal something from someone, if I harm someone, the same harm is going to be inflicted on me. All right? I think that would be a good thing for everybody to remember. It would be how different would our society be if we knew that if I killed someone that I was going to be put to death. That was it. All right? If I intentionally took someone's life, I was going to be put to death. If I caused harm to someone, that same harm is going to be caused to me. All right, we're probably a little bit more careful. Does that mean everybody is? No, I mean that's just human nature. There are going to be people who are going to be up to no good regardless of what possible harm could come to them. They just don't care. They have a problem with society anyway, and they're not going to behave according to societal pressure. So, all right. And then he talks about all of these if you continue on. A man strikes the eye of his slave, male, female, and he destroys it. He shall let the slave go free because of his eye. Now, it shows a position of authority and a position of submissive, right? You have a master and you have a slave. If he strikes the slave's eye and it knocks it out, his eye is not to be taken, but the slave goes free because of his eye. All right, you know that's the way that he's going to make it right. Okay, same thing with the tooth. He lets the slave go free because of his tooth, and he continues on. He goes all the way through these things, and he talks about the ways in which the reciprocity. All right, something happens, you do something. This is the way that it's going to be paid back. All right. I've marked some of these, and I want to make sure. I'm going to go see if we go. I know everybody's read all this before we started today, right? Everybody went through and read the next couple of chapters, right? Everybody? Right. Okay. Does anybody see anything particular before we get a little bit further? I want to go to chapter 22. Chapter 22. But if you go through these, it's if I cause some harm to happen, how am I to repay? All right. If somebody causes harm to me, how am I to be repaid? But let's go to chapter 22 and go on. It says let's just do verse 16 and continue on. It says, if a man seduces a virgin who is not betrothed and lies with her, he shall give the bride price for her and make her his wife. In other words, it protects her integrity. And believe me, at that particular point in time, integrity was essential. Essential. If a woman was known to be promiscuous, and it didn't change because of the man, okay? And we got to make sure that it's not that a woman was held to a higher standard. It wasn't, because the laws about sexual sin were very clear. But here he says, is if a man seduces a virgin, or if, in other words, if a man comes on to a woman who is not betrothed and lies with her and takes her virginity, he's basically taken anything away from her that might have been of use to her later on. Now, is she relieved of responsibility? No, not at all. Okay, it doesn't say if he takes her, and if this is a situation of rape. That's not what this is. This is a situation where a man comes on to her, she's perfectly willing, and then they go and do the sexual act. He's taken from her that one thing that would give a bride price for her. So he says, what are you supposed to do? Then guess what, buddy? You're on the hook. You've taken something from her that she can't get back. So he is going to give the bride price, and she is going to be your wife now. It's funny how God looks at the way God looks at these things versus the way that we look at these things, isn't it? Well, there's a huge difference between the way God looks at integrity, especially sexual integrity, especially in this day, that day and time, versus the way that we look at it today. All right, isn't it? It's incredibly different. We see the way God takes it very seriously. We really don't, do we, in today's society? I'm not talking about the church. I'm talking about in society. We don't take it very seriously. It's become so common that you are beyond strange if you look at it in any other way. You know, I look at the way that it was changing when I was growing up, but my daughters today, they're confronted with a society of, how weird are you? What is wrong with you? You know, how in the world is it that you've never been with someone and you're 18, 19, 20 years old. Well, I'm waiting till I get married. What is wrong with you? You know, you're selling yourself short. You're not taking advantage of everything that you've got to give. What is wrong with you? But God said, no, that's not the way it's supposed to be. This is something serious. This is something very precious. And society, of course, has said, you know, we sell it for the mess of pottage, so to speak. But he took it very seriously. He believed in the family so much that was the first of the institutions, wasn't it? Before the church, before government, before anything, there was the family, a man and a woman, to be together as a family, to have children. And even in that family, there was a hierarchy that there was supposed to be seen and observed. The way that they were supposed to behave with one another. The level of respect that one was supposed to give to another. So he takes it very seriously. And I know that he looks at the world that we live in today, especially in Western society. There are many Eastern societies that they're still very serious about this. Okay, they may turn a blind eye to a certain portion of it, but they still believe very much in the integrity of marriage. You know, you get married, you stay married, you don't mess around. That's the way it is. And of course, things have changed dramatically because we've put ourselves in the place of God. We are our own gods now. All right. Verse 18, you shall not permit a sorceress, and some translations say you shall not suffer a witch to live. And that idea is that when you've got someone who practices those types of arts or that type of craft, that you are putting that in the place of God. And he says you're not supposed to permit them to live. So in other words, what? What did they do to witches and sorcerers? They put them to death. They killed them. They have the opportunity to flee and get out, but if you don't, then your life is forfeit. You're not supposed to do the things that God is supposed to do. You said something. Oh yeah. Still going by that. Old Testament. Today, do we permit witches to live? Yeah. I mean, they have no power. The point behind it was that you allowed people who claim to be able to do something that only God is able to do, to conjure spirits, to act in the lives, to use supernatural means to accomplish something. Could they do it? I dare say that they could not, but essentially what you're doing is you're saying, we're going to allow these people to do something that only God is able to do. Or we put these people and give them, even if it was in their own mind, to give them a position of power or authority over something that only God has power over. The spiritual realm, the supernatural realm. He says, no, you're not going to do that. They will pull your minds away from me, and they certainly will. They certainly will. But even today, it's interesting that they have no power. They have no real power. But I've heard members of the Lord's church talk about going and seeing somebody that can spiritualists, going palm readers and all that kind of nonsense. And I'm thinking, you're a member of the Lord's church, and you're going to tell me you put your faith into that kind of nonsense? You'll go give them your hard-earned money so they can tell you if this is the right job to have, or if this is the right person for you, or whatever it might be. It makes no sense. I don't understand it. But again, if we're not careful, they'll pull our minds away from it. We'll allow them to. And we go in willingly, and turn over our money to them. We got to be careful about that. But do I think that we should storm the gates and bring them out and put them to death? Of course not. For one thing, I don't want to go to prison. For another thing, they have no real power, and I certainly don't want to take someone's life over something that's imagined. That makes no sense at all. But here he was very serious about it. He says, I don't want anything to pull your minds away from me. I don't want anything to draw your hearts away from me. I should have an utmost position of authority in your lives. And these people will pull you away. And this idea of witchcraft and sorcery goes back, as far back as creation, doesn't it? I mean, all of those courts of those pagan kings and those kingdoms, they had people that they believed could summon spirits and could speak to the gods on their behalf, and all of these things, absolutely. The sorcerers and the witches eventually became priests and priestesses of those pagan gods, and that's what they were. So he's very serious about that. Verse 19, whoever lies with an animal, this means, there is no other way to look at this, but this means in the sexual sense. Whoever lies with an animal as with a man or a woman shall be what? Put to death. Why? Because it's unnatural. That is not to be found in nature. We are separate from the animal kingdom. Don't let anybody tell you that man is just another animal. We are not animals. We are a separate group of people. God made all of the animals of the earth and of the sky and of the sea and everything that's in this world. He made all of those, and as a separate thing, completely separate, He says, I'm going to make man. And we are separate and apart. And in doing so, He's wanting to make sure that we understand that, this is not arbitrary on God's part. He says, I want you to understand that you are a human being, and you are separate from the animals. You're not the same. You have a soul. You have that part of you that brings you into true life. Nowhere else did He say He breathed the breath of life. He didn't breathe it into the animals, did He? That idea, that eternal sense. When I know this hurts people's feelings, but when an animal dies, they die. We mourn them. We're sad that they're gone, but they're gone. They're dead. They don't live forever as mankind lives forever. We have souls. Okay, that brings us close to God. So He was very serious about this. When you found somebody in that kind of engaged in that kind of behavior, you put them to death, so that sin is no longer in the camp. Right? Whoever sacrifices to any god other than the Lord alone shall be devoted to destruction. You shall not wrong a sojourner or oppress him. And this is the idea of what's a sojourner? Who is a sojourner? Stranger in the land, right? So if there's strangers in the land, He says, what are you not supposed to do? You don't wrong them. You don't treat them as less than human. When you're engaged in commerce with them, you don't cheat them simply because, well, this is our country. You're not supposed to be here, or you're not from here, so I have the right to take from you and do whatever I want to you. I can come into your home or wherever you are and take what I want from you. No, of course not. They're human beings. They're to be treated as human beings. You shall not oppress him, for you were sojourners in the land of Egypt. In other words, you catch somebody in the land that's not from there, you can't impress them into slavery and say, well, no, you're mine now, and everything that you have belongs to me, and I can make you do what I want, or I can make your life miserable. No, He says, no. Why? I love how He gives them an answer, because why? You were a sojourner once. Remember what it was like? Remember what it was like? Be pressed into slavery and to do something that you didn't want to do? And to have your life just be made miserable because of who you were? No, can't do that. They were not to do that at all. This verse 22, I like this because this goes into the idea of true religion, doesn't it? Look at verse 22. You shall not mistreat any who? Widow or fatherless child or orphan. All right. What is pure and undefiled religion before God and Father? Visit. To take care of. The idea of visit means, of course, to take care of the widows and the orphans in their present distress, whatever situation they find themselves in. If a widow's in need of food, what do we say? Well, the Lord will take care of them. No, it's our responsibility. Religion is what? What is religion? It's the physical manifestation of our faith. That's what religion is. Religion is not spiritual. Religion is physical. Well, our religion is to do what? To do the will of the Father. What is that? To take care of the widows and the orphans. That's our religion, and it's pure and it's undefiled. So even back then, He says, take care of these people because they can't take care of themselves. Right? What's an orphan going to do? Wander around, hope maybe some handout, hopefully somebody will take care of them. Now the idea of orphan here is someone who has no one. There's no one to take care of them. Same thing with a widow. Back then it was a whole lot different. And they didn't have many options. So in other words, you don't mistreat them. You take care of them. If you do mistreat them and they cry out to me, I will surely hear their cry. And look what He says. My wrath will burn. My wrath will burn. So did God take their plight seriously? Yeah, because look what He says He's going to do. What does He say in the very next breath? My wrath will burn and I will what? I will kill you with the sword. Now, I want us to think about this for just a couple seconds. The 12 tribes, as they were, eventually became a kingdom, and then they became a divided kingdom. And then you look at all of the things, all of the trespasses against God that led up to their being destroyed by the sword, right? First by the Assyrians and then by the Babylonians. I want to ask you, I challenge you to go back through the prophets, the major and the minor prophets, and look at their prophecy before these kingdoms. Look at their prophecy, and you will see time and time and time again, no less than 12 times that I know of, where one of the reasons that judgment was being pronounced against these kingdoms was because of their treatment of the people who were what the book calls the least among them. The least among them were the orphans and the widows. He says, this is the reason that this judgment is being visited upon you. They did not take care of the people who needed taking care of. Their minds had been turned away to foreign gods, right? They weren't following the law. They weren't allowing the land to have its Sabbath. All of these things added up, and their trespass before God was it was enormous. It got to the point where there was nothing they could do to alleviate this calamity that was going to come upon them. And part of this, if you go back all the way, it's interesting. You look at what God did to them, and He started warning them as far back as Exodus chapter 22 and verse 24. He says, I will kill you with a sword. And what did He do to them? He killed them with a sword. They weren't taking care of people. They weren't alleviating the plight of the least among them. And the idea of least doesn't mean least important. It means the ones that have the least amount of power. Orphans didn't have anything. They didn't even have land. Widows didn't have anything. They didn't have anything. You better take care of these people. Take it seriously. All right. Let's see. Look at chapter 23, just the first couple of verses. I think about these as more of a common sense type of thing, right? The idea of bearing false witness, right? It's one of the 10 Commandments, right? You shall not bear false witness against thy neighbor. Who is thy neighbor? Who's the neighbor? Anybody. I have no right to lie about anybody, regardless of who they are. Look what he says in chapter 23. You shall not spread a false report. You shall not spread a false report. You shall not join hands with a wicked man to be a malicious witness. You shall not fall in with the many to do evil. This tells us something today. You know, you think about he's writing to his children, the children of Israel. He's writing to the Israelites at this particular point in time. Is he talking to us today? Yeah. Has this gone away simply because we're under the law of Christ? There are certain things that are absolute, no matter what. Now, during the time of, for example, you shall consecrate the firstborn of your flocks to me. Your firstborn belongs to me. Doesn't mean you have to give them over. It just simply means that they belong to me. Is that still appropriate today? No. We're under no obligation to give our firstborn to God. We're supposed to raise up our children in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. That's how we do that. That was something that was for the Mosaic age. That was something that was under the old law. There are things, though, that supersede the law, aren't there? They were in place before the law, and they're in place after the law, aren't there? Right? There are things that have always been right before God, and there are things that have always been wrong before God. The idea here, the idea of you shall not spread a false report, the idea of lying or spreading a malicious rumor, something that's unsubstantiated. Do you think that was something that was only true under the law, or is that something that supersedes the law? What? It's what? It's for all, yeah. That's something that supersedes time, right? The idea of sexual sin, I talked about that a couple Sundays ago. The idea that this was something that for God was something that was important. It was important as far back as He created mankind. That didn't just come into play when the law was instituted. It was always true. God merely put it down in words and He codified it under the law. It's always been true. He's always believed that, and He always will believe that. That was not something that hinged on what point in history that we lived in. Okay? So the idea here is that lying has always been wrong, hasn't it? Lying has always been wrong. Nowhere has God said that lying was an acceptable practice for us to engage in. For the Jew, for those under the patriarchal system, and for the Christian today. A lie is a lie is a lie, and it always has been. We have no right to lie about anybody, no matter who they are or what's going on. Right? Would you agree with that? All right. So today he's speaking to us. Don't spread a false report. Just that's it. Mm. It's perfectly acceptable, and I say that under the law, not personally, but under the law, it's perfectly acceptable to lie, except when we've been brought as a witness. In a court of law, it is wrong, and we can be punished for lying. If I want to go out and tell a lie to somebody out in the world, there's nothing illegal about it, believe it or not. You have to engage in a contract and lie in a contract. It's interesting how the world looks at it. It's perfectly acceptable to lie unless it may cost somebody something. But for God, that's not the case, is it? A lie is a lie. He doesn't care whether it's in a court of law or whether it's me simply talking to Brother William and see him asking me a question and I lie to him. God says, no, you're not supposed to do that. But it didn't cost him anything. We're not in some sort of a contract. He said, I don't care. You don't lie. You don't lie. And if we think about this and we just bring this forward just a little bit, the idea of lying, let's think about this for a couple of minutes, just a couple of seconds, and we're going to be done. Go forward about 3,500 years from this particular point. 3,500 years from this particular point. If you remember, what sent Christ to the cross? It was base men who were brought as false witnesses. That's what they said. They could not find reliable witnesses, decent men, so what did they do? Some translations said they went and found men of the basest sort. And what that means is these are people who, under no other circumstances would anybody listen to what these men had to say and believe it. But because they were brought for that particular purpose, their words were given weight that they would not have been given at any other time. These were men who were just, it's a wonder that they weren't already in jail. Okay? These were bad men. They should never have been listened to, but they were brought in as witnesses. And I want you to just look at this. You shall not spread a false report. You shall not join hands with a wicked man to be a malicious witness. You shall not fall in with the many to do evil. Nor shall you bear witness in a lawsuit, siding with the many so as to pervert justice. Boy, all of that is summed up in exactly what happened on the night that Jesus was betrayed, right? He was brought forth, and there were some who sided with the many to pervert justice. They spread a false report. They fall in with the many. They join hands with wicked men to be a malicious witness. All of the above. They spread a false report. And all of that was what sent Christ to the cross, because they had nothing else. If they didn't have those witnesses, they didn't have anything else. So they had to find men who were willing to pervert justice. For what? They paid them. They paid off very, very bad men to be very, very bad witnesses. And these were men that would never have been listened to for any other reason other than this. All right. Let's stop there because we're going past time. And we'll start back up on this next week. Again, I encourage, go ahead and read the next couple of chapters and see if there's anything you got any questions about. If anything you want to discuss. Like I said, what I find interesting or applicable may not be what you find interesting and applicable, and vice versa. So I want to know if there's something that you want to, if you want to kind of touch base on it a little bit more and work it over. So let me know. But we're going to go ahead and stop there.